The hunters of prehistory walked a world of giants, where danger was never far and fear was as real as the breath in their lungs. A single mistake in the tall grass could mean the crushing weight of a mammoth's tusks or the sudden strike of a saber-toothed predator. Yet these were not the only terrors that haunted them. Far greater fears lingered beyond the reach of firelight. What kept their hearts racing in the silence of the night? Was it the growl of unseen beasts, the storm clouds that could erase entire hunting grounds? Or something even stranger, something I will reveal later in this journey. These men and women lived not as masters of their world, but as fragile guests within it, forever testing the edge between survival and death. And if you follow this story to the end, you will discover that what they feared most was not always the beast before their eyes, but forces hidden, powerful, and far more unsettling. Prehistoric hunters lived in a world that never allowed comfort, a land where the earth itself could betray them and where every shadow carried a threat. Their greatest strength was courage, yet courage was constantly tested by beasts and landscapes that seemed designed to destroy them. And the question we must ask is, what were they most afraid of when the hunt began? For many, the immediate terror was the mammoth, not simply because of its size, but because of its unpredictable power, a creature that could crush hunters beneath its weight in a single charge. And though mammoths provided meat, hide, and bone for survival, facing them was not triumph, but a gamble with death. But if mammoths terrified them, what about the saber-toothed cat, whose fangs were longer than a man's hand and whose ambush could strike without warning? Hunters feared the unseen leap more than the visible foe, for how do you defend against an attack that comes in silence, from the tall grass or the shadows of a cave? And yet, the danger did not end with predators. Dire wolves hunted in packs, and their strategy was to circle, to exhaust, to outlast, leaving hunters cornered with no escape. The terror of being surrounded was more than physical, it was psychological, a primal panic that even today we can feel when trapped or watched. But here lies the question, were predators the only thing that gnawed at the hunter's mind, or was there something even more dangerous? Storms, for instance, could sweep across the plains without warning, freezing rain turning ground into death traps, snow burying entire camps, lightning setting the grass ablaze. Nature itself was as much an enemy as the animals they pursued, and hunters feared the sudden shift in weather more than they admitted. Yet perhaps the most unsettling truth was that hunger stalked them even more relentlessly than claws or fangs, for an empty belly drove men into foolish risks, chasing prey too large or wandering too far from shelter, and starvation's shadow was a fear that crept silently but never left their side. Still, there is something else, something I will reveal later, a fear so deep it bound every choice, every ritual, every whispered story around the fire. And it was not always flesh and blood danger, sometimes it was the invisible forces they believed governed life and death, forces they could not see but felt pressing in from the darkness. Think about it, when every step beyond the fire's glow could mean teeth, claws, storm, or starvation, what did a hunter truly dread the most? The answer is not so simple, and as we move deeper into this story, you'll see how fear shaped not only their survival, but the very roots of human culture itself. If predators and storms haunted the days of prehistoric hunters, then the nights brought terrors of a different kind, terrors that reached into their bones and reminded them of how fragile they truly were. For when the fires burned low and the world outside grew silent, fear took on new shapes. Was that rustle in the grass the wind, or the footstep of something waiting to strike, something smarter than they could ever be prepared for? Consider the hyena of the Ice Age, not the scavenger we know today, but a monstrous, bone-crushing beast with jaws that could snap femurs as if they were twigs. And imagine the unease of hunters who knew these creatures followed them, stalking the edges of their camps, waiting for weakness. And if such predators tested the limits of bravery, then the giant short-faced bear obliterated them. For this colossal predator towered above men, faster than a horse, strong enough to kill with a single swipe, and its presence was so overwhelming that many tribes considered it not just an animal but a spirit of death itself. Yet what is more frightening than an enemy that can kill you? An enemy you cannot see until it is already too late. And this was the way of disease, parasites, and sickness that crept unseen into their lives, striking down even the strongest hunters. And here I will tell you later of one chilling clue buried in bones that reveals just how much illness shaped their fears. But even without sickness, the land itself was a predator, with rivers that swelled and drowned those who tried to cross, with cliffs that crumbled beneath their feet, with sudden avalanches that buried entire hunting parties without warning. And this unpredictability made every step a gamble with fate. Now think of the silence before the hunt, the hunters advancing toward prey they could barely see. The knowledge that one mistake could bring death, not just for them, but for their entire group. What would that do to the human mind? Did fear sharpen their senses, or did it crush their spirit? Perhaps this is why rituals and superstitions grew alongside their hunting. Chants and charms, not simply to give them confidence, but to protect them from what they could not control. For if death lurked everywhere, how else could they believe they stood a chance? And here's something I will reveal as we go further. The stories told in whispers around those fires were not only warnings of predators and storms, but of something stranger. Things in the dark they could not name, and those stories were as much a weapon of fear as the fangs of a predator. Still, nothing inspired such trembling dread as the thought of being hunted while hunting, of realizing too late that the line between predator and prey was not a wall but a mirror, and many times the hunter became the hunted, caught in the jaws of beasts that owned the land long before humans dared to walk it. Ask yourself, what does it mean when survival itself demands that you face not just hunger and cold, but creatures beyond imagination? Storms without mercy, sickness without cure, and even the invisible weight of belief? The answer is not yet complete, because what prehistoric hunters feared the most was not simply dying, it was the knowledge that death could come from anywhere, at any time, in any form. And that truth shaped their every choice, their every ritual, their very identity as humans walking a world far more dangerous than our own. We have spoken of mammoths and saber-toothed cats, of dire wolves and storms, of hunger and disease, yet still the question lingers, what, above all, did prehistoric hunters fear the most? To answer this, we must step deeper into their world. Beyond the surface dangers, into the heart of what it meant to live as both predator and prey. And here lies the truth. The greatest fear was not always the beast before their eyes, but the uncertainty of what lay beyond their control. Think of the great open plains, stretching endlessly under skies filled with storms, where hunters knew they were exposed, visible, vulnerable, and they must have asked themselves, who is watching us now? What tracks follow behind us? When will the next ambush strike? For every successful hunt was a victory. But every failure was a reminder that they walked a knife's edge, and sometimes the edge broke beneath their feet. The giant, short-faced bear could appear without warning, and no spear could truly stop it. The saber-tooth could strike from the shadows, its fangs ending a life in moments. The mammoth could turn from prey to executioner in a single charge. Yet even when no predator was near, the fear of nature's wrath was ever present. An ice-age blizzard could sweep across the steppe in hours, freezing hunters before they reached shelter. Floods could drown entire camps, droughts could strip the land bare, and famine could starve even the bravest of men. But perhaps the most unsettling truth is that fear was not confined to what was visible. Hunters feared sickness that spread like whispers through a group, fevers that burned away strength, wounds that refused to heal, infections that turned a scratch into a death sentence. And here I must tell you, archaeologists have found bones showing signs of infections that lasted weeks. Proof that illness was as terrifying as any predator, for it could not be fought with a spear or driven away with fire. Still, there is something more, something deeper. For hunters feared the unseen forces they believed controlled their fate, the spirits of the land. The ghosts of animals they killed, the shadows of ancestors watching. And these beliefs were not foolish superstition, but survival strategies, for if you could not master the world, you had to explain it, you had to respect it. And to disrespect it was to invite disaster. Around their fires, they told stories of things in the dark, warnings not just of beasts, but of powers beyond flesh and blood. And though we may call them myths, for hunters they were real as the mammoth's tusks or the wolf's fangs. So ask yourself, was their greatest fear the predator's strike? The storm's fury or the silent creep of hunger? Or was it the weight of knowing they were never in control? That life itself was fragile and could vanish in an instant? The conclusion, then, is this: prehistoric hunters feared many things, but above all, they feared vulnerability, the knowledge that no matter how sharp their spears or how brave their hearts, they were small creatures in a vast and merciless world. And yet, is that not what shaped us? What forced humanity to grow, to adapt, to invent rituals, tools, and eventually civilizations? The fears of the hunter forged the resilience of mankind, turning trembling in the dark into stories, stories into traditions, and traditions into the roots of culture itself. So when you wonder what prehistoric hunters feared the most, remember it was not just the beasts that stalked them, not just the storms that swallowed them, not just the hunger that weakened them, but the eternal truth that life was fragile, that safety was an illusion, and that survival could never be guaranteed. They lived in constant dread, but from that dread was born the strength of humanity. And perhaps the haunting part is this: many of those fears are still with us, carried quietly in our bones, reminding us that no matter how much the world has changed, we are still hunters in the dark, searching for firelight against the endless night.